I welcome representatives from the Australia Institute. Information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you, and we have at least Senator Sterle and Senator Pratt who are joining us online at the moment. For the Hansard record, could you please each state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
I'm Matt Grudnoff and I'm the Senior Economist at the Australia Institute.
Thanks, Mr Grudnoff.
Greg Jericho, Chief Economist of the Australia Institute.
Thanks, Dr Jericho. I now invite either or both of you to make a short opening statement, at the conclusion of which the committee will have some questions for you.
We have nothing more to sort of add from our submission, so we're happy to go straight to the questions if you want.
All right. Terrific. We appreciate that very much.
I can repeat something out of the thing if you would like.
Can I thank you for your comprehensive submission? It's already been really helpful for the committee in considering the issues that we're inquiring into. How would you describe Australia's supermarket sector in the context of the levels of competition?
I think it's been getting worse for the last 20 years. I'd describe it as a duopoly, a situation where you've got two dominant firms. There are other players, there are another couple of smaller players, but really those firms dominate, and that creates two problems. One, at the consumer end, less competition means higher prices, and we've seen their margins increase over the last 5 years quite substantially. But it also, they're a monopsony buyer, that is, they're one buyer, and they have power over their suppliers, who are largely highly competitive, as in there's lots of suppliers, and they're able to exert that market power and extract from the supplier end. So essentially, they're able to extract profit from both their suppliers and the consumers. So they're bad for both ends of the chain. And
what we've also discovered in our research is that really Australia is a bit of an anomaly in that our supermarket sector is probably more concentrated than you would expect it if you compare it to America, the UK, even Europe. And as a result, the margins by the two major supermarkets are greater than those of the major players in those other markets. So it certainly is a case of it's concentrated, but perhaps what's more worrying is that it's actually more concentrated than in other comparable markets. And I think that's certainly from our research is something that you can't just explain it away as being, oh, well, you know, supermarket sectors are always concentrated. There's always a couple of players. Yes, but Australia's, in our view, worse than elsewhere.
And just to be clear, Dr Jericho, are those two things in your view correlated? That is, the market dominance of the duopoly in Australia and the fact that their profit margins are higher than some similar jurisdictions?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, you could almost make a case that given Australia's size and relative population, that perhaps Australia should be a tougher place to make a decent profit, given the costs of transport and various things. And yet the opposite's the case, and we would suggest that, yes, there's very much a strong link between the fact that the market dominance of the two major supermarkets definitely is a contributing factor in that, in fact, a major factor in that profit margin.
Thank you. Would it be fair to suggest, in your view, would it be fair to suggest that the duopoly has used its market power to increase prices above and beyond what they would have had to do to cover increases in their input costs in recent years, and particularly with some of the undoubted supply-side issues that we have seen during the COVID period, international geopolitical conflicts, climate change being disruptions to the supply chains. But do you think it's fair to assert that the duopoly has used their market dominance to increase prices above and beyond what they had to cover increases in their input costs?
Yes, we've seen their margins increase over that period, and their profits have also increased. And the research we did, we found that we estimate that the two major players are earning about $1 billion a year more than they would if their margins were the same as what they were in 2018. That is, because their margins are higher, even accounting for all of their increased costs and all of the other disruptions, they're earning substantially more, $1 billion more, than they would if they'd had the same margins as 2018.
Is price gouging a fair way to describe that kind of
That's
behaviour?
certainly one way of describing it, yes.
Yep. Thank you. This inquiry has been tasked by the Senate to also inquire into the divestiture powers bill that is currently before the Senate, that was tabled by the Australian Greens. That gives the ACCC the power to apply to the courts to make a divestiture order if a company has been found to have misused its market power. Do you have a view on? Would you support such a change to competition law in Australia? And whether or not you do, could you talk the committee through, as far as you are able, some of the effects that such a change in the law might have?
Yeah, we think divestiture powers are a good idea, and the main reason is because the ACCC, as it currently stands, has very few powers to actually inject competition into a market that is already low in competition. So mergers and acquisition laws, which also get a lot of attention, particularly at the moment, they stop a market from becoming more concentrated, but they're not particularly useful once a market is concentrated. So if you have a market like we have at the moment with supermarkets, mergers and acquisition laws are not particularly useful. Whereas if you can break up the major competitors, you can actually inject more competition in the market. What the ACCC has at the moment really are regulatory powers, and obviously I think that they need further beefing up, but that's really all they can do once a market is uncompetitive. So divestiture powers is an entirely different form or power, a different tool that the ACCC or the courts can use in order to inject more competition into a market.
And under, I guess, accepted economic theory, would greater competition in the supermarket sector put downward pressure on prices for customers? I'll just stop there.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So, competition benefits consumers. They're the main beneficiaries of competition. Competition means that firms have to work harder to satisfy customers and accept a lower price. So, the biggest winners from competition are always consumers, and you can see why large firms don't like them, because no big business is going to like competition. Why? Because they have to work harder to earn, and they earn a lower price and a smaller profit. No firm is going to want that, but, if you want to look at the economy as a whole, and you want to take into account who gains the most benefit from it, then obviously as an economist we're most interested in helping consumers.
And also I'll just add that especially in the retail sector and specifically the supermarket sector, the groceries, divestiture powers would also be, I think, of great import in the wholesale trade sector, where you have there's often a view that farmers deal directly with Coles and Woolworths, whereas it's not the case. There are wholesalers who have, in some ways, even greater market power than do the supermarkets, and so it should not be seen as only applying to Coles and Woolworths. We would expect the divestiture powers. Our research has shown that Australia is a concentrated economy, in effect. The more you look at it, the more concentrated power you find across a number of sectors, a number of industries. And certainly we have heard from the supermarkets, just anecdotally, that they will try to shift the blame, to the wholesalers. Well, we think, if that is the case, then divestiture powers should be in their interest as well, because it would benefit their ability to negotiate with wholesalers. So we certainly don't see divestiture powers as purely an anti-Coles and Woolworths measure. It's actually something that would also help the...
We want to see
it would help
economy-wide.
it'd help the consumers, but certainly in the retail and wholesale sector, it actually help producers, especially in agricultural areas, where they're not forced to just sell milk to one person or to sell to another organisation. That actually hopefully have some greater competition there, which in the end leads to lower prices for consumers as well.
Well, you've successfully anticipated my next question, Dr. Jericho, so thanks for saving me the time there. Would you accept the proposition that divestiture powers wouldn't necessarily actually have to be exercised in order to have some impact in terms of putting downward pressure on prices?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about divestiture powers is they are, in a sense, a bit of a nuclear option. They're not something where you want the bar to be low because that could potentially have an impact on investment decisions where companies almost would not want to become too successful. It's not about preventing successful companies, it's about preventing a complete lack of competition and, in effect, monopolistic behaviour. And so we'd want a high barrier. But just having that barrier and that power on the books brings with it a fair bit of power. Now, we know from, if you look at America, where they've had divestiture powers for I think over 100 years, or for as long as I can think of. That doesn't mean they get used a lot, but it's very well known, and it's a case of a bit like a lot of deterrent weapons. They don't get used, but if they're powerful enough, and if you know that the red lines are set, and certainly in law the ability for them to be enacted are there, I think that can have a very good pressure on companies who certainly would not want to have to go down the path of proving to a court that they should not be split up.
Thank you. And just look, finally on divestiture, Dr Emerson, who was tasked with conducting an inquiry into the Code of Conduct, has offered some unsolicited views on divestiture laws recently. I note with precisely no evidence or justification to back up his claims. So I just wanted to put to you some of the things that Dr Emerson has said and ask whether you had a response. Firstly, it's Dr Emerson's view that divestiture laws could lead to greater market concentration.
Well, that seems highly unlikely. If you were breaking up a firm, then clearly you're doing it in order to inject more competition into the market, and any legislation that the Parliament passed about those divestiture laws could include the fact that dominant players couldn't buy up the firm being broken up. I'm sure it's not beyond the power of Parliament to do that. I mean, we even have merger and acquisition laws now that might be sufficiently powerful to stop that from occurring. So I would find that highly unusual and highly unlikely.
Thank you. Dr Emerson has also claimed, again with no evidence or justification to back him up, that divestiture laws could lead to store closures.
Yeah, I think, again, that one seems highly unlikely because the mere fact that these stores are there suggests that they are profitable enterprises that another company would seek to take ownership of if the availability was there. And I very much, I certainly, none of our research and certainly basic economic sort of theory would suggest that if you have an operation that is profitable, there would be a willing buyer for that operation. To suggest otherwise would be to suggest that the only way that stores can operate in certain areas is if they have a monopoly power, which, yes, it might be a monopoly, but that doesn't mean it has to be the one company that has a monopoly across Australia. It might have a monopoly in that town, and I'm sure that would be quite profitable for whichever company. This divestiture powers are, in a sense, ensuring that Australia-wide over the whole economy, that there is not a monopolistic company that has massive power in that market. But we're not suggesting that a divestiture power would mean in a country town suddenly you're going to get 2 more supermarkets opening. It's just it might be when you go from town to town across regions, they're not all Woolworths or not all Coles. You might actually see some different brand names at the top of the store.
And what are we saying about Australian business when we don't think that they can invest in a profitable enterprise? I mean, you'd have to have a very, very low opinion of Australian business to believe that.
All right, thank you. And lastly, in the context of Dr Emerson's comments, he suggested that divestiture laws could lead to a loss of jobs. Thoughts on that?
No, quite the opposite. If we've got a more highly competitive industry, that industry would be selling at a lower price and so therefore is likely to sell more, not less. And if you're selling more of the product, you're going to need more workers in order to sell that. So I would suggest the opposite is true, that companies, duopolies and companies with large market power are likely to employ less because they increase their price, decrease the quantity they supply, and therefore need less employees to supply that quantity.
And one of the whole underpinnings of competition policy is that competitive businesses are more productive, and if you're a more productive business and you have a more productive economy, that should be good for jobs, and it also should be good for companies as well, who suggest that we often hear from business groups that productivity in Australia is the problem. Well, greater competition is actually good for productivity. So it's, again, a bit like with the suggestion that there would be store closures. I don't think there'd be store closures, and I think the people who are employed there would continue to be employed, and I could not see any employment impact of a divestiture of power that would be any different to what is going on already.
All right, thank you. And just to be clear, your answers, would you accept the proposition that the answers that you've just given in response to the questions I've asked about Dr. Emerson's comments, your answers are based in accepted economic theory?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, thank you. The ACT's done, I'm sure you're aware of it, the ACT did a report led by Professor Fells into price gouging. Professor Fells recommended making it an offence to charge excessive prices. Would the Australia Institute support that recommendation?
Yes, we certainly gave evidence to that inquiry, and one of the, I think, very worthwhile recommendations of that was the acknowledgement that the ACCC at the moment really doesn't have much power over prices as such. It purely is about competition. But it has no power to actually investigate prices of a company that may not be breaking the law, and essentially that is probably the issue, the nub of the issue at the moment, is that companies can charge excessive prices, can price gouge, can increase prices by more than is needed to cover costs, and it might be perfectly legal. And the ACCC has no power to investigate that, and certainly no stick to use if it found anything, even if it were to investigate. So certainly we would, again, support any moves to, one, establish, I think he called it a pricing authority or a pricing commission, and certainly giving that powers which would enable it to say to companies, well, you say you're doing it tough and that you are raising prices in line with costs, show us the books, let's have a look. And, transparency would bring, we think, much greater benefits for consumers.
Oh, thank you. So just to be clear, you not only support Professor Fells's recommendation that it be an offence to charge excessive prices, you also support his recommendation that a commission on competition and prices should be established?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. I've got some more questions, but in the interests of equity, I'm going to share the call around. Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Chair. A bit all over because there's some questions you've got to fit in what gets asked, and I'm up the batting order. Page 10 of your submission, there's a very interesting paragraph for me. It starts, indeed, it could be argued a response to a supply shock, which make input costs more expensive, should be a decline in average profit margins. You note that the supply shock of COVID almost had the opposite effect for Coles and Woolworths. Can you give some reasons you think that indicates over market share?
Yeah, look, that's because of power that firms have, pricing power or market power that firms have in the market. If you have a competitive market, then increases in costs are shared between consumers and producers. That is, consumers have to pay more, but also profit margins fall. That is producers also have to pay more. So the very fact that even if firms only increase it by the exact amount of the cost, that's actually a sign of excessive market power in that particular industry. We should see that sharing of the price of the costs. the increasing costs. So yes, absolutely, it's all about how much market power we've had. And essentially over the last 20 years, Australia more and more has become an economy filled with oligopolies. And again, to go back to our previous point, that's why divestiture powers, we think, are important, and that they apply across the economy, because more than just supermarkets, there are lots of firms and industries within Australia that have a lot of market power, and we've largely taken our eye off the ball in this kind of area, and I think there needs to be more of a focus on competition in the Australian economy.
Yeah, one of the things about that line is essentially a bit of a pushback on the argument that, our profit margins didn't go up, so that shows that we don't have market power. It's like, but your costs went massively up, and that means you were able to actually raise prices and not suffer any pain, whereas if it was actually a true competitive environment, you would expect in a case of a supply shocks like we saw in the pandemic that companies would suffer.
So they're powerful enough, they actually choose who loses, the supplier or the consumer. It's just not them.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's okay. A lot of really good economic stuff. What's clear is the high proportion of spend on basics and groceries for those with lower incomes. So doing nothing and maintaining prices has a disproportional result on those who need the most, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So lower income earners spend a larger proportion on groceries because groceries are an essential good, and so therefore you can't do without them. So a bigger proportion. So the bottom 20%, I think, spend about 16% of their income on groceries, whereas the top 20% only spend about 5%. So when grocery prices go up, that disproportionately impacts lower income earners.
Okay. I want to thank you. You've given me a new word. Didn't know. Is it monopsony? Is that correct?
Monopsony. So that's a single buyer.
Yeah, I've never heard that word until you're. So thank you for that word. But we've seen a lot of that. We've seen, as you mentioned, the wholesale buyers, lots of fruits and buyers, and processors too scared to go on record. You know, we've had a few people come on in camera. We've had a few people things you can't rely on. If a market is so scared to give information about their thing, surely that is a leading trait of that, what you're talking about, monopsony.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the problems, we think that making the code of conduct compulsory is a good step, but I have concerns that that doesn't take away that monopsony power that the large retailers, the large supermarkets have. And if one of the things with the code is nobody makes complaints, or very few complaints are made. If you make it compulsory, that doesn't change the fact that if somebody complains that they're worried that if you don't sell to Coles or Woolworths, then you've basically rubbed your business out. And that power doesn't disappear just because you make it compulsory. So
not only should we make it compulsory, we should introduce mechanisms of a proactive audit process where there is a required compliance. So a supplier could be forced to hand their stuff, not make a complaint, therefore they can't be held accountable. There should be a proactive thing going forward looking at market abuse.
Absolutely. If people are worried, as they obviously seem to be, about retaliation, then there needs to be mechanisms in place if the code of conduct is to work effectively, where they can't be retaliated against.
I noticed the BCA are not fans of what we're being spoken about in divestment. They're coming out saying, you know, this is the worst case scenario, it'll cost jobs, it'll cost the economy, it stops businesses growing. Isn't that the point? Businesses got to a size where we don't want to grow them anymore?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, if the BCA came out and were in support of it, I would be worried. As I said earlier, competition is not good for big business. The losers, the biggest beneficiaries from a lack of competition are the big dominant players in that industry, and the BCA represents those. So if they didn't think that anything was going to change, then the BCA would be in support of that. The fact that the BCA isn't supporting that shows me that they're worried that their power within the market might be damaged.
Okay. Interesting, again, economic analysis in your point. We've asked a question on notice, so there's no, you didn't know this was coming tomorrow, and we've not got it on margins, on gross profits, on these sorts of things. And they keep coming back to percentage of net profit or EBIT or EBITDA data because they don't want to give us that data. There's all sorts of things, we can't give it, we can't. realistic expectation do you have that companies like this could not give a cost of goods less than sales to give a gross profit margin over time? Do you think there's any realistic thing they couldn't do if they wanted it?
I think if you're one of the major companies in Australia, you would have a pretty good idea of what you're paying for goods and what you're selling them for.
You'd think so, wouldn't
You would think so.
That's the basis of how they make a profit.
And certainly, I mean, the Bureau of Stats every quarter has the business indicators, which has sales, wages, costs, and, we have a pretty good aggregate, and we know that the ABS gets those figures from the actual company. So, no, I think it is very clear that they should be able to provide information. And I think going back to what Matt was saying, all of the things that have been proposed here are about competition that we're always told free market is the boon for an economy, and that companies love the free market, don't want governments being involved. Well, in a sense, this is just ensuring that companies can compete with each other. It's not so much about government intervention. It's about ensuring that the markets actually operate in a way that they should, rather than in the way that they are now, where there actually isn't much competition going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And divestiture is a way of actually reducing government regulation. The problem is if you have an uncompetitive market, you can either regulate the prices or you can break them up and introduce competition, and then you don't have to regulate the market.
So what we're talking about is it's a tool for a fair market, not a free market.
Economists don't love just free markets, they love competitive free markets. Uncompetitive free markets are just as bad.
It's market failure, isn't it?
It's market failure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. In your analysis, you go through, when we're talking about these numbers, the supermarkets come online saying they're making 2 to 3% of turnover as profit. But you put return on shareholder funds between 25 and 30. I'm almost wanted to go out and buy supermarket shares after reading your report. So that's what return on shareholder funds of 25 to 30%. Is that what we're finding at the moment?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And one of the things you always need to think about when they talk about, it's a low margin operation. Low margin doesn't mean low profit.
Yeah, I can answer it. Yeah.
And also think about the actual type of industry it is. It's not a high risk industry. They are selling necessary goods that everybody needs every day. There's no real risk, or are people going to suddenly not want bread or milk or meat or any of these cleaning products? And also, what actual value are they adding that deserves a high profit margin? They're, in a sense, putting items on a shelf in a way that we can go through and find them. That's pretty much it. It's not like they are adding value to a can of baked beans that says, oh yeah, actually you deserve a big markup on top of that because of the value you've added to this product. No, you've put it in a place that is convenient, but the problem is that they want to be the only ones who are convenient for customers. And so we always think the talk about sort of profit margins is, they'll compare themselves to a high-risk industry, like a mining industry, where there are a lot more risks involved in what is done, whereas setting up a grocery store, it's not a high risk, but so where they're getting the profits, or where they are seeking to make their profits, is by ensuring that there's not much competition.
Okay, so we're obviously picking on a big two at the moment, but as evidence comes forward across the sector, we're seeing stuff like big bulks or big box stores doing this. We're hearing stuff about, we've got another group appearing, the Endeavour Group, this afternoon in the Liquor and Hospital. We're really talking about making that competitive free market what we base our economy on, aren't we? And just shutting down abusive market power, nothing more than that.
Absolutely, yes. So that's the objective. Free markets, free competitive markets work really well because they service consumers, they maximise output, they maximise employment. Uncompetitive markets create big profits for the owners of those firms, but they hurt everybody else.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks, Senator Cadell. We'll go to Senator Pratt, who's online.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to the Australia Institute. Can I ask for a little bit more detail on powers to investigate and public transparently publish data on trends in prices and profits? Because there's a lot of different ways that you could do that. And I guess I'm keen to see that be done in a way that can benefit consumers and market information in the best possible way. I raised examples with Per Capita and with other organisations, really about the lack of ownership that customers have over their own data, and equally in talking to producers, they seem reluctant to share information with each other, even though they're asking for more transparency around the prices that the price differentiation between what they sell for, volumes, and what goods are sold to consumers for.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Senator. I think it's one of the main problems with especially most markets, but certainly the retail and supermarket sector, is a complete ignorance of what things cost and why. And we saw this, over the past 10 years when suddenly we had Coles and Woolworths selling $2 milk, and people assuming that Coles and Woolies were getting the $2 milk from some farmers, but they were paying other farmers more for the other price milk, and not realising, no, the farmers weren't getting any better prices from anyone else. It was purely a retail decision by Coles and Woolworths to sell some brands, their own brand, at $2 and allowed other milk to be charged at others. And so there is a complete lack of understanding of what goes into prices, and we've seen the real impact of that came during or after the pandemic, where we saw prices go up, and there was no sense you could go in there and think, well, why has the price of my bread gone up by 20%? Why has it gone up 20 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents? There's very lack of understanding, and in fact, supermarkets themselves will seek to blame it all on, say, input costs of wheat or things like that, whereas our research looking at the input-output tables of the national accounts shows that actually the price of wheat has a very small impact on the price of bread. There's a number of markups all along the way, and so certainly we think if it was in terms of greater transparency, it'd be through a body like a National Prices Commission that would have the ability to actually look at the books, I guess. Now, how public that would be, we haven't made any recommendations on, but certainly we believe that one of the good things we've seen, I think, just sort of anecdotally, is that we didn't have, say, 10 years ago, is that you can go into a supermarket and see the price of things on a per kilogram or per 100 gram basis, which I certainly use all the time when even I'm looking at things like dishwashing tablets, and I have no idea what is a good price, but I know that I think if it's around 40 cents a tablet, I'll probably go, with that one. So those aspects, I think, really highlight that more information is good for consumers, and I think one of the other aspects, and this was certainly shown by the Fells inquiry, is that there's often a lot of subterfuge about, for example, what is a special, and whether something is on special. Is it actually 20% cheaper, or is it just actually that's a figure that has been put on by the company? So I think more transparency, how that would actually work. Matt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is we've seen competition from the sort of bits and pieces of research that has happened over the last 20 years. We've seen competition across most industries in Australia decline. And one of the problems I think we have at the moment is the ABS doesn't actually produce a lot of statistics on competition. And what we would love to see is an annual or quarterly publication, competition publication from the ABS, that talks about concentration ratios and other measures of competition, and basically lays it all out so that we have a regular update on where competition is at, what industries are becoming less or more competitive, and then that that, I think, would allow policymakers and the government to better target policy to where it's most needed. At the moment, we're largely blind. And I think...
Yeah, I guess I am interested in some simple solutions to this. There are plenty of consumers who are quite good at shopping around, but they don't have, and that can in turn help drive prices up or down and create competitive markets. But we lack access to the information to do that, even though Coles and Woolies know exactly what I've spent where, based on linking that information to my credit card or my Flybuys or my everyday rewards. Can we, rather than just give governments access to that information, can we be asking supermarkets and retailers in general to give us access to our own information beyond just a hard copy shopping receipt?
Yeah, look, absolutely. The government could create legislation that makes us the owner of our data. And in doing that, then we would be able to access it. Largely...
And choose who to share it with as consumers,
Yes.
like if we want to share it with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence or Choice or organisations that might be able, ACOS, organisations that could do some analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we owned it,
then
then it would be our property and we could share it with whoever we like, restrict access to it whoever we like, but also have access to it from people who were collecting it.
You could sell it to corporations if you wanted to monetise
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
And just, on
there are
that...
corporations that have monetised that data already, and I guess we would be we would be interrupting that market of exchange of data more specifically than supermarkets overall. Do you think there are any risks to that? I know they would complain very loudly. How would we tactically deal with raising those issues and dealing with the market power, not just of Coles and Woolworths, but of those companies who get their profits specifically from that trade in information?
Well, they definitely will complain because, yes, they're making profits for nothing, essentially. They're taking our data, we're not having to pay for it, or they're not paying us for our data.
I do like getting my Flybuys discounts. I've noticed I've spent a lot of money with Coles, and I do notice they are now starting to offer me my money, $10 here or there off my shopping bill, which is, I guess, a sign of how much I've spent there.
Yes, but I think...
would I be foregoing that, or would it just change the the way they do business?
Well, I mean, essentially it would make it more transparent. At the moment, the idea is to make it as convoluted and difficult as possible. You take dollars you spend, they turn it into imaginary points that have a value of some kind, and then we convert them perhaps back into some kind of other dollar. We don't have any direct link between those two, because if you did, then you could actually see what they are worth, and they don't want that to occur. So if people had ownership of
that
their...
level of information that really does drill down into... I find it, unless we've got access to that more global information about what consumers are putting in their basket, how much they're paying in different locations, and that's even before we get to volumes. To be honest, I find it very hard how government could actually do a good job getting analysing that information, because just price points in different locations, it's not the same as having access to the kind of analytics of consumers being able to put their data together.
I think one of the problems also with this issue is that even if if consumers had greater understanding of what is being used with their data, the reality is what's their choice when it comes to actually then choosing better options, and that's the problem with the entire sector, is the lack of competition between the major suppliers. And so if you've you understand where your data is, but you've only got Woolies in the 10 kilometre, 20 kilometres circumference around where you live and work, then it's not going to matter much. Certainly, and Matt's right. I mean, we talk about these credits and things, but we have no idea what the value of a credit is and why it should be, one for one thing or two for another. And also, obviously, companies use those incentives to direct custom to certain products, because they'll offer a bonus, a double, if you purchase these items on this day. So it's not just a reward. It is actually a tool designed, one, to drive sales in certain directions, drive overall sales, and then they use that data. And we have very little understanding of how much do they get for that data when they sell it on. It's all a black box of opaqueness, and I think consumers would like to know, how much is my data worth to Coles? How much is it worth to Woolies? I think that'd be an interesting thing, and you can find out and then choose to, I'll take the $10 a week bonus, or actually, no, you can still have my data, but you're going to have to charge me a set fee every month for it. I don't get any rewards for it, but you're charging for it. It's if they're selling a product and there's a supplier of that product, the supplier should get some reward, but at the moment we really have no choice. And I think all of this is about more choice and more transparency.
And I wanted to ask about any particularly, well, I think there are some acute areas of concern where you've got low-income households unable to travel to bigger centres where they might be able to do a more affordable shop. Do you see any particular solutions for them, or do we have to fix the problem for everybody to help those who are most vulnerable? Like, there are plenty of households who can and do shop at more expensive places because that's their preference, and they don't mind going to a more expensive supermarket, and they will shop at the nearest one because it's convenient. But there are other households who are restricted simply because they don't have transport options or they're too remote.
We always believe that when dealing with people on low incomes, to help them have more income, and whether that's raising the rate of job seeker or pensions, or doing all we can to support higher minimum wages. I think I would not want to go down the line of providing specific grocery support for low incomes earners. I kind of want to keep away from the American system where you've got the stamps and things like that. When it comes to low incomes, we just are in favour of higher incomes for low income people. And we believe that low income earners would benefit, though perhaps more than other income groups, from changes to competition laws towards greater competition, because they spend more of their money from it.
Yeah, look, more competition means lower prices, which benefits everybody. And if your particular business model is about convenience and charging a higher price, you can try and do that. And if people think that's worth it, they'll buy stuff from you. Otherwise, they won't.
Yeah. Could it also be about the making sure there is more competition, but also profitability for producers for staple items, as opposed to more discretionary ones that supermarkets sell? I mean, should we be focusing on looking at competition in key areas, or is that not?
I think certainly.
Or is that not relevant?
Yeah, I think Senator Certainly, as we were pointing out before, the issues of competition, because they go through the wholesale sector as well, I think you can certainly put a greater focus on perhaps some of the more staples. The milk is one that sort of cries out, but vegetables and certainly we did see a great disparity between the wholesale price of, for example, lamb and what people were paying in the shop. So I think if you were to have, for example, this National Price Authority, certainly it would be more likely to focus on those necessary items rather than worrying about I don't know whether there's been some price gouging going on, and I don't want to pick out a product that probably is. I was going to say air freshener, but I'm then thinking, is that actually a necessity? I'm not sure, but yeah, that's why I didn't want to do it. I've got 2 cats, and we need it. So certainly, I think the focus needs to be on those areas, and I do take your point about those areas are ones that are going to have the greatest benefit, especially for those on low incomes.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Pratt. Just a couple of quick ones to wrap up from me. You've submitted, in terms of some of the suite of policy options that you've suggested, excess profit taxes or super profit tax, probably a few different ways to describe that. How might that work in the supermarket sector?
So you would just have a benchmark level of profit, a return on profit, and then if a industry exceeded that, then they would pay a higher rate of tax on those super profits. Economists love super profits taxes because they don't change behaviour. You only pay it if you're making excessively huge profits, and then effectively all the government doing is taking some of those excessive profits. So we need to understand those excessive profits only happen when you have firms that are gouging their customers, that are extracting from their customers. And the idea is the government takes some of that gouging and can then hand that back in some form of compensation to those that are missing out, particularly those that are struggling the most.
All right, thank you. And yesterday the Treasurer announced the government's model for merger law reform. Have either of you had an opportunity to have a preliminary glance through that?
Preliminary, yeah.
On a preliminary basis. So the ACCC put forward a model which became option 3 that the government put out for consultation. The government's accepted some parts of that model but not others. I wanted to specifically ask you whether you're aware of the failure in the government's announcement to reverse the onus of proof. So that is, at the moment, the ACCC has to prove that a merger will lessen competition, and if the onus were to be reversed, it would be the companies who are conducting the merger, who want to merge, that would have to prove that the merger would not lessen competition. Now, that doesn't form part of the government's proposal. Do you have any... and just to be clear, that was part of the ACCC's recommendation. Do you have any views on the failure of the government to accept that particular part of the ACCC's model?
Absolutely. Look, it's very clear, not just in supermarkets, but across the economy, we're seeing competition decrease. I think that the onus of proof should be on businesses to show that they're not lessening competition. At the moment, we're seeing over the entire economy a lessening of competition. If you want to reverse that, then you're going to have to do something like reverse that onus of proof. If it's obvious that it's not going to lessen competition, then a firm shouldn't have much difficulty in proving that. But there's an information asymmetry. That is, the businesses have all of the information, the ACCC has a lot less. And so if the businesses with all the information can't prove that it's not lessening competition, then it probably is lessening competition. And so that's why I think in this particular case that reversal of proof is a useful tool.
So the ACCC has said, just because I'm paraphrasing here, not quoting, but the ACCC has effectively said that the test as it currently stands makes it very difficult for them to take action.
And look, they're the ones that have to do it, and so we should probably listen. If they say it's really difficult and they're the ones that are always having to do this, then they're probably good people to listen to on this.
So you'd sing from the same song sheet as the ACCC on this issue?
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grudnoff and Dr. Jericho, both for your attendance today and the Australia Institute's engagement with this inquiry, and you go with our thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the new work.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research, commentary and analysis, as well as details for upcoming events and webinars.